My name is Madison Cole, and I never thought a Thanksgiving dinner could split a family open like a fault line. I'm 35, a financial analyst in Denver, who built my entire life around discipline. Budget sheets, color-coded folders, and a tiny one-bedroom condo I fought 10 years to afford. It's the safest place I've ever had, which is probably why everyone else in my family believes it belongs to them, too. The chaos started just as my mom was carving the turkey. My younger brother Evan, 31, unemployed again, wearing the same hoodie he's had since high school, cleared his throat like he was about to propose to someone. Instead, he announced to the entire table, "I'm moving into Madison's place next week, just until I get back on my feet." The fork slipped out of my hand. I looked at him, then at my parents, waiting for anyone, to laugh and say it was a joke. But they all nodded like this was already decided, like I was the last person who got the memo. I told him no. Calmly, firmly, respectfully. My condo is small, my job requires quiet, and I've already taken him in more times than I can count. Evan slammed both hands on the table so hard the cranberry sauce jumped. "You live alone, Madison. Stop being selfish." The whole room went silent. My dad set down his glass and said, "He's family. You should help without making it complicated." Mom chimed in, "Honestly, you've always been the difficult one." And right there, surrounded by people who claimed they loved me, I realized they weren't asking. They were expecting, demanding, entitled to my space, my money, my peace. Because for them, my life was just a backup plan. I took a slow breath, pushed my chair back, and stood up. Their eyes tracked me like I had just committed a crime. Before I continue, let me say this. If your family has ever tried to guilt trip you into saying yes when you needed to say no, tell me your experience in the comments. And if you want to hear how this story unfolds, hit subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. I stepped out onto the cold porch, pulled out my phone, and whispered into the receiver, "It's time. Activate the plan." Lights glowed from the dining room behind me, while the wind stung my cheeks. Inside, they were still talking about me like I wasn't part of the family. But out on that porch, for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than guilt. I felt clarity. When I drove home after that Thanksgiving dinner, Denver's skyline felt colder than usual. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that usually comforts me. But that night, it felt like the world was holding its breath. I parked my car, climbed the stairs to my condo, and let the door click shut behind me. A small sound, but one that reminded me this place was the only thing in my life I truly owned. The only space where no one expected me to fold myself smaller just so others could spread out. It wasn't always like this. I grew up believing family meant safety. But somewhere between childhood and adulthood, that definition shifted, mostly for me. For everyone else, family became an excuse for Evan to drift through life without consequences. And for me, it became a lifelong invoice. 10 years ago, I worked 2 jobs just to scrape together a down payment. I'd get home at 1 a.m. from a bartending shift, sleep 4 hours, then spend my mornings analyzing financial statements at an entry-level office job. While my friends were going out, I was calculating interest rates and balancing grocery money down to the last cent. I remember the night I signed the mortgage papers. My hands shook, not from fear, but from pride. This condo wasn't just a roof. It was proof that no one could take my hard work away from me. But Evan, he walked through life like the world was a trampoline designed to bounce him back whenever he fell. When he lost his job the first time, He came to me with a suitcase full of dirty laundry and a speech about needing a fresh start. I let him crash on my couch for 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks became 3 months. 3 months became him using my groceries, my utilities, and my patience like they came from a bottomless well. And every time I confronted him, he'd look at me with those helpless eyes and say, "You're doing well. You can afford to help a little." But helping him meant sacrificing myself. At one point, I was paying for his phone bill just until he got a new job, spotting him gas money, even covering late fees on an old credit card he swore he would repay. He never did. And somehow, every time I tried to set a boundary, my parents would swoop in, not to help me, but to protect him. Mom always said, "He's the baby of the family. You know how sensitive he is." Dad would pat his shoulder proudly and tell me, "Your brother just needs time. Don't make him feel judged." But what about me? What about the nights I cried from stress, wondering why my own parents never defended me? I once told Mom I felt overwhelmed, that Evan was taking advantage. She sighed, put her hand on my cheek, and said, "Madison, you're strong. You don't break easily. Evan does." And that's when I realized something painful. In my family, strength wasn't admired. It was exploited. There was a stretch of months when Evan stayed with me again, this time because he needed to regroup. My condo turned into a daycare, a hangout spot, and a storage unit. He invited friends over without asking. He borrowed my laptop and overwrote my spreadsheets. He ate food I bought for the week and left takeout boxes on my counter like I was his maid. And yet, I kept helping him, because some part of me still clung to the idea that if I gave enough, tried enough, bent enough, maybe they'd finally see my worth. Maybe I'd be the final daughter who made them proud. But they didn't. Not even once. On Thanksgiving night, standing alone in my living room, I finally let myself feel everything I'd buried for years. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't cold. I wasn't the difficult one. I was exhausted and deeply, deeply hurt. I didn't need a family that took everything. I needed a family who noticed when I was breaking. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I was finally settling back into my routine. My condo was peaceful again. Silent mornings, hot coffee, spreadsheet tabs blinking on my laptop like obedient little soldiers. I was starting to breathe normally, to convince myself I could handle the fallout with some distance. That peace lasted exactly 8 days. On a Tuesday afternoon, while double-checking a portfolio for a client, my phone buzzed with a fraud alert. 3 separate purchases, all from the same electronics store, all charged to my credit card. Total, $942.18. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Fraud happens, cards get skimmed, hackers exist. But when I pulled up the transaction details, my stomach actually dropped. The charges were made in person, at a store Evan used to go to. And the cashier had verified the card using a signature. A shaky, curved version of my name that looked like a child's attempt to copy cursive. My brother forged my signature for almost $1,000 of gaming equipment. I called the store manager. He remembered the buyer perfectly. He said the card belonged to his sister, that you always let him borrow it, the man explained, sounding tired, like he had seen this kind of dysfunction too many times. I hung up, my hands trembling so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. I wasn't even angry yet. I was stunned, like someone had thrown a brick through my window and I was still staring at the shards. Anger came a few hours later, because not long after the fraud charges, I discovered something worse. A new phone line had been opened under my name and social security number. It was like Evan wasn't just taking my money anymore. He was taking pieces of my identity. I confronted him over text. "Did you use my card? And why is there a new phone plan under my SSN?" He replied in less than 60 seconds, but not with an apology. "Relax, you make plenty. And it's family, Maddie. Stop acting like a stranger." That one message ignited something hot and violent in my chest. Family? Family isn't a free pass to commit financial fraud. Family isn't entitlement wrapped in emotional manipulation. I told my parents. They barely flinched. Dad sighed and said, "He probably meant to pay you back. You know how stressed he is." Mom added, "Honestly, Madison, sometimes you blow things out of proportion." Blow things out of proportion? A stolen credit card? A fake signature? Identity fraud? Their blindness wasn't just frustrating, it was insulting. It was like all my pain, all the effort I put into building my life didn't register unless it benefited Evan. That night, Evan sent another message. "I'm still moving in after Christmas. You need to stop getting worked up. We're siblings. That condo is basically the family's anyway." I read that sentence 3 times. That condo is basically the family's. No, absolutely not. That was the moment my anger sharpened into something clearer, colder, something close to resolve. Because suddenly all the little things over the years snapped together like puzzle pieces. The times he borrowed money he never returned, the months he lived off my groceries, the nights he treated my home like his bachelor pad, the way my parents always excused him with a soft voice and a sad smile, the subtle expectation that I would always say yes. And now, fraud, forgery, identity theft. He wasn't just inconsiderate. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't the baby of the family. Evan was dangerous, not in a violent way, but in a slow, draining, soul-eating way. The kind of danger that hides behind family obligations and leaves you drowning in debt and guilt. Still, the part that hurt the most wasn't what he did. It was that my parents, the people who raised me, saw all of this and still believed I should open my door to him, no questions asked. Like my job, my home, my sanity were all built to be Evan's safety net. But I wasn't his safety net. I was his target. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't going to let him take one more thing from me. Not money, not space, not my identity, not my peace. They showed me their true colors, and I was finally ready to show them mine. What comes after the fire is the quiet. The heavy, suffocating quiet. And that's where I found myself. The week after Evan forged my signature, I started waking up at 3 a.m. almost every night, my heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. At first, I thought it was too much coffee. Then I realized it wasn't caffeine keeping me awake. It was fear. The kind of fear that whispers, what if he does something worse next time? I stopped leaving my laptop open. I kept my purse zipped, even inside my own home. I changed every password I had, some twice, because I kept imagining Evan guessing them. I ordered credit freezes, identity monitoring, even changed my PIN at the ATM, because the world suddenly felt full of tiny, invisible cracks he might slip through. And the worst part? I felt like I was going through all of this completely alone. One night, after work, I sat on the floor of my living room surrounded by stacks of printed statements, credit card screenshots, bank notifications, and emails from the fraud department asking for documentation. I had been avoiding opening them, but now they surrounded me like a paper graveyard. Every page had evidence of a boundary crossed. Every document was a receipt of betrayal. I stared at them until the words blurred, and for the first time in years, I cried in a way that shook my whole body. Not a quiet cry, an ugly, breaking cry. A cry that comes from somewhere old inside you, somewhere that's been ignored for too long. I didn't cry because of the money. I cried because of what it meant. That my brother thought he could steal from me. That my parents expected me to forgive him. That my whole life of working hard and being responsible had turned me into the family doormat. I tried calling my mom that night, hoping, just hoping she would hear the fear in my voice. Instead, she sighed and said, "Madison, you're dramatic when you're tired. Evan's going through a lot. He needs us." I whispered, "What about me?" She paused. Too long. Then said, "You're fine. You always are." And that was the moment I understood exactly how alone I was. A few days later, things got worse. My building's concierge called to ask if I'd approved someone to pick up a spare key. I froze. Evan had tried to charm his way into getting access to my condo again, using the same family stories he always used. The concierge said he didn't give it to him, but the damage was done. My sanctuary didn't feel safe anymore. That night, I sat on my couch with the lights off, staring at the shadows on my wall, and wondered, truly wondered, if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too strict. Maybe I was too guarded. Maybe I did owe my family more. Then a thought hit me so sharply I actually gasped. If I open that door for him again, I will lose everything. My finances, my mental health, my sense of safety, my entire life as I knew it. Evan wasn't just draining me, he was erasing me. That realization sat heavy in my chest, a weight that made it hard to breathe. I knew I needed help, but asking for help felt like admitting defeat, a feeling I had been taught to swallow since childhood. Still, that night, I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and whispered a name I hadn't said aloud yet. Grace? Grace Holloway, a family law attorney in Denver. A woman I'd spoken to once through a coworker's referral. She picked up on the second ring, her voice steady and warm in a way that made my throat tighten. I told her everything. The fraud, the signature, the attempts to enter my condo, the pressure from my parents, the years of manipulation I had normalized. I didn't cry this time. I didn't have tears left. When we hung up, she simply said, "Madison, you're not overreacting. You're in a dangerous cycle, and you're doing the right thing by calling me." Those words cracked something open inside me. Something like relief. Something like grief. Someone finally believed me. Someone finally saw what was happening. Before we hung up, she said, "Document everything. Don't confront anyone, and don't open your door." After the call, I sat in the dark, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights blur through my tears. I had reached my limit. My strength was gone. My hope was thin. But Grace's words echoed in my mind. "You're doing the right thing." Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Not freedom. Not yet. But the first faint breath after nearly drowning. The morning after I spoke with Grace felt strangely different, like the air in my condo had shifted. My problems hadn't vanished, Evan hadn't magically become a better person, my parents hadn't apologized, nothing in my life had changed. Except one thing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. Grace's words replayed in my mind as I made coffee. Document everything, don't confront anyone, and don't open your door. Simple, clear instructions. A lifeline disguised as legal advice. So I followed them. I bought a small lockbox for my documents, labeled every folder, backed up screenshots onto 2 drives, and stored one off-site in my office. I changed the passcodes to the building's entry system. I added a deadbolt, and then I installed a doorbell camera with a wide-angle lens that notified me every time someone even walked past my floor. Evan had always relied on me being unprepared. Not this time. Grace created a shared drive for me, organized, color-coded, with timestamps and statute references. She reminded me that nothing we were doing was revenge. It was protection, prevention, and boundary setting backed by law, not guilt. For the first time, I saw my situation the way she described it, not as family drama, but as a pattern of financial abuse disguised as sibling dependence. That realization was both painful and freeing. 2 days later, Grace asked if I'd be willing to gather more evidence if an opportunity arose. Nothing illegal, nothing deceptive, just documentation of conversations and actions that could escalate the situation. And the opportunity arrived sooner than either of us expected. It was Christmas Eve. My parents invited me over again, though the text invitation was noticeably cooler than usual. I went, not out of obligation, but out of strategy. I brought a tin of cookies, smiled politely, and kept my phone in my pocket, already connected to a discreet recording device. But I didn't need it, because the moment I stepped into the living room, I noticed something. My parents' house had the perfect angle from the dining room shelf to capture conversations from the kitchen pass-through, a place Evan and my mom always gravitated to when they wanted to whisper without others hearing. I could feel my heart pounding as I set a small, motion-triggered camera above the buffet table under the guise of keeping an eye on the stove so Liam doesn't wander too close. Mom nodded approvingly. Evan barely glanced up from his phone. Dinner passed in a blur of clattering silverware and strained smiles. Then, just as I predicted, it happened. While dessert plates were being passed around, Evan leaned close to my mom, his voice low but clear enough for the camera. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't taking accountability. He was laying out a plan. She leaves for property showings every morning. I'll take Liam, bring our bags, and get in before she gets home. The key code hasn't changed. She won't even know until we're already moved in. My mother nodded. Nodded, as if conspiring to invade her daughter's home was a normal family solution. Every word streamed live to my phone. My chest tightened, not in fear this time, but in absolute clarity. They weren't going to stop. Not with guilt, not with logic, not even with my direct refusal. They were going to force their way into my life unless someone stood in their way. And that someone had to be me. By the time I drove home that night, Denver blanketed in silent snow and twinkling lights, I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel weak. I felt steady. Grace reviewed the footage the next morning. Her exact words were, "Madison, this is exactly what we needed. Not revenge, not spite, evidence. The foundation of what was coming next. The beginning of my return to myself." I didn't sleep much the night after capturing Evan and my mother's whispered plan. But for once, the tossing and turning wasn't from fear, it was from anticipation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to their chaos. I was prepared for it. Grace emailed me early Christmas morning. Subject line, "Ready when you are." I was. But life has a way of delivering justice faster than you expect. Christmas breakfast at my parents' house started off deceptively normal. Eggs, cinnamon rolls, 2 strong coffee. Relatives joined over a giant TV set to a holiday slideshow. Kids tore open gifts, adults exchanged small talk that sounded brittle around the edges. And then the universe, or maybe just pure irony, intervened. My dad grabbed the TV remote to turn down the volume on a cartoon Liam was watching, but instead of lowering the sound, he accidentally switched the input. And just like that, the dining room wall filled with the live feed from my tiny recording device. Crystal clear video, crystal clear audio. Evan's voice boomed through the speakers. "She leaves early every day. We'll sneak in before she notices. The key code hasn't changed." Mom's voice followed, "Just go. She'll calm down eventually." A fork clattered onto a plate. A cousin gasped. Someone whispered, "Is this right now?" No, the timestamp showed last night, just hours earlier. My mother froze mid-step, her face draining of color. Evan shot to his feet, shouting, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" But it was too late. Every secret, every manipulation, every whispered betrayal was now playing like a home movie, one they could never deny or rewrite. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I simply picked up my coat, nodded politely to the relatives staring at me with wide, stunned eyes, and walked out the front door into the cold December air. The snow felt cleaner than anything inside that house. At 7 a.m. the next morning, my doorbell rang so aggressively it felt like an alarm. I checked my tablet. There he was. Evan. Duffel bag slung over his shoulder, face flushed from the cold. Liam on his hip, rubbing his eyes. And behind them, my mother, dragging a rolling suitcase, her expression twisted somewhere between anger and desperation. They were really going to do it. They were really going to force their way in. But this time, they weren't dealing with the old version of me, the version who said yes out of fear, guilt, or exhaustion. This was me with the lawyer, evidence, and boundaries backed by law. I left the chain locked and spoke through the door. "You need to leave." Evan pounded on the wood. "You're heartless! It's freezing out here! Liam needs warmth." I tapped the screen to activate the speaker on my doorbell camera. My voice came through steady and amplified. "I offered help. I sent resources. I just won't let you move in." Mom chimed in loudly. "We have belongings in your storage from last time. You can't keep us out." Ah, there it was. The leverage they always leaned on. The belief that because they once left a box of winter coats in my closet, they had a lifelong pass into my home. But not today. I slid an envelope under the door. Inside were printed numbers for emergency shelters, rental aid programs, and a list of lawyers who specialized in tenant disputes. Evan ripped it up right on camera. The pounding continued, the yelling escalated. Neighbors peeked from their doors. I documented everything. At 7:35 a.m., the group chat lit up with the subject line, "Formal cease and desist, Attorney Grace Holloway." She had emailed every relative in the family thread, citing trespassing laws, identity fraud statutes, and a binding order that prohibited Evan or my parents from attempting to enter my home or use anything tied to my personal information. Screenshots of the forged signature, copies of fraudulent charges, audio transcripts of the recorded conversation, all attached. The silence that followed was glorious. Aunt Melissa was the first to respond. "Madison, I'm so sorry. This went too far." Then Uncle Troy, "If Evan needs a place, he can come talk to me. You did the right thing." For the first time, the family didn't rush to protect him. They rushed to protect me. By New Year's Eve, Evan was officially evicted from his apartment. The sheriff's deputies supervised as he stuffed clothes into trash bags and loaded Liam's toys into dented boxes. My dad's truck idled silently at the curb, headlights dim in the gray winter morning. For once, none of it was my responsibility. Not my debt, not my guilt, not my burden. I watched the aftermath from a distance. not with satisfaction at their suffering, but with relief that the cycle was finally, irrevocably broken. Justice didn't roar. Justice whispered, "You owe them nothing." And for the first time in years, I believed it. In the weeks that followed, the world felt strangely quiet, almost like stepping out of a storm into a room where the walls are still humming from the thunder. My phone no longer buzzed with demands, my doorbell camera no longer flashed warnings. My nights, once filled with dread, were finally still. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't toast to their consequences. What happened wasn't revenge, it was responsibility. For myself, for my peace, for the life I had spent years building and nearly lost to guilt and manipulation. I moved through my condo slowly those first few days, touching the counters, rearranging my bookshelves, opening the blinds just to watch the light spill across the floor. It struck me how long it had been since my home actually felt like mine. Some days the hurt returned in small waves, memories of my mother calling me difficult, or Evan insisting he deserved space in a life he never helped build. But the waves didn't knock me down anymore. They reminded me why I drew the line. And despite everything, I didn't cut everyone out. Not completely. I sent a donation box, quietly, anonymously, to Liam's preschool. Thermal socks for winter, a science kit, a membership pass to the Children's Museum. He was innocent. He didn't choose any of this. But I didn't attach a name or a note. The gift didn't need one. As for me, I'm learning that boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're doors with locks you control. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is close that door, firmly, fully, when someone refuses to stop breaking it down. So if you're listening and you've ever had to build a wall with your own family, not out of spite, but out of survival, I see you. You're not cold, you're not selfish, you're not dramatic. You're protecting your future, and your future deserves protection. Tell me in the comments, where did you draw your line? Your story might be the reminder someone else desperately needs today.